So yes friends, last class we were talking about basically trying to find out the lattice parameter based on X-ray diffraction techniques. And we said in principle, if I can find out the lattice parameter precisely for a particular phase, let's say a phase called alpha, which is typically a terminal solid solution, I may be able to find out the what is called the solver's line. This is what we have discussed in the last class, and we took an example of, let's say, aluminum copper system, and we said that if I can take various alloys and heat them to different temperatures, at each of the temperature I quench the alloy from that high temperature and take each of the alloy and do X-ray diffraction, and from the lattice parameter of alpha, measuring the lattice parameter of alpha, I will be able to find out these points very precisely. And once I know these points at various temperatures, just join them, you will get the solver's line. And this is one of the techniques used for that. The second method to find out the phase diagram is to do what is called the fraction of the phase, or determining the formation of a second phase. Let us say I take a temperature. This is my choice of temperature. Let us say at each of this at this temperature, I take a number of alloys like this, heat them again to same temperature like we have done it in the last class, quench them from there, and I see that these four alloys 1, 2, 3, 4 are all single phase when they are quenched, but alloy number 5 is not a single phase because at that temperature it has alpha plus theta. So as a result, this particular alloy, when you quench it, it will show alpha plus theta, whereas the other alloys show that single phase alpha. That means somewhere between 4 and 5 is the boundary for me. Once I don't know this, I will try to narrow down my search a little bit, make a few more alloys, let us say, between 4 and 5, and then try to find out exactly that particular composition where my amount of the second phase I start seeing. Or if I can now, instead of finding out the lattice parameter, I start finding out the amount of the theta phase in all these alloys. That's where the small problem comes. How do I find out the amount of the phase? And that is what in the last class we said in one of the classes recently. We said that if I have a XRD pattern for a particular two-phase mixture like this, let's say these peaks belong to phase 1 and these peaks belong to phase 2, let us say, then if I know the intensity of this, integrated intensity, area under the peak, the area under the peak is a representative of the amount of the phase. So in principle, if I want to find out amount of phase 2, I can take intensity of phase 2, okay, intensity of phase 2, let's say I call this as alpha, I call this as beta, let us say, just for the sake of understanding, I say intensity of whatever most intense peak of it. I will try to, let's say my alpha is a FCC phase, my beta is a BCC phase, let us say. So this is a 111 peak and this is a 110 peak of beta. So I will take the most intense peak of beta, I beta, divided by I alpha plus I beta, will tell me the percentage of beta. So that means take the area under this peak. You may ask me, why are you always talking about area under the peak, not just simply the height? I said the height of the peak does not give you a representation. We will see it as we go along in one of the next classes, that it is depending on the conditions of the sample, the height may be very small, but the area may be very large. It may be very broad. If it is very broad, you need to actually consider the area under. So find out the area under the peak and find out the area under this peak, and then take the ratio of this by the ratio of the, sum of these two. That will give you the percentage of beta. But this has two problems. One, is that this particular peak of beta should not have any overlapping of alpha. If there is a possibility that this peak is an overlapped peak of alpha and beta, then I should not consider this. Then I should start searching for some peak of beta where there is no alpha peak overlapping. This is the first job I should do. So I should find out a completely independent beta peak which is not being overlapped by any of the alpha peaks. Similarly, I should find out completely an independent alpha peak which is not being overlapped by beta peak. Otherwise, this particular intensity is composite of alpha intensity and beta intensity. So that becomes a difficulty for me. So first and foremost is find out independent peaks for alpha and beta where there are no overlaps. This is the first. In spite of doing that, still this is a problem, and which we discussed in one of the last classes. We said that this particular intensity is not only a measure of the amount of the phase, but also is a measure of the what is called atomic scattering factor. Because intensity comes as square of structure factor, and square of if I look at structure factor is nothing but e power 2 pi I into hx plus ky plus lz. So the square of this is what we are talking about. So it is possible that my beta phase, if I simply take again the example of alpha and aluminum copper phase diagram, my alpha, let me now call this as a theta phase. And what is theta? Theta is the Al to Cu. Alpha is nothing but aluminum, pure aluminum, more or less with a small amount of copper in it. Right? It's a solid solution of copper in aluminum, whereas this is the Al to Cu phase. If it is the Al to Cu phase, and how much of copper is there in this? If I look at this atomic percentage wise, it is 33% of copper. Atomic percent. If I look at it weight percent, okay, this is almost, what is the atomic weight of copper? 63.5. Atomic weight of aluminum is 27. So 27 into 2, so it is 63.5 divided by 1 atom. Only 1 atom of copper is there. Divided by 63.5 plus 2 into 27. Okay. This is how I can find out the weight percent of copper in this alloy. Okay, in this particular compound. And that turns out to be 63 divided by this, and it turns out to be more or less more than 55%. Approximately around 55%. So it is 55 weight percent. Because it is 55 weight percent of copper, and copper having an atomic number, which is how much? Atomic number of copper is 30 or 29? 29. 29. And atomic number, this is for copper, atomic number of aluminum is 13. Right? So as a result, if I want to find out the atomic scattering factor, F of Al to Cu will be equivalent to 2 into F of aluminum plus F of copper. Because 2 atoms of aluminum is there, 1 atom of copper is there. And this, because of F being equivalent to Z almost, so I can say this is equal to 2 into, or rather than 2, I should have said 0.66 into this, into 0.33 into this, because that is the fraction inside the Al to Cu. 2/3 is aluminum, 1/3 is copper. Okay, so if I take that, the overall the F here is going to be higher. So F of Al to Cu will be higher than F of alpha, right? If that is the case, then that though if I can take a particular alloy, an alloy like this, which is supposed to have some amount of alpha, some amount of theta, let us say this alloy is supposed to have 15% theta and 85% alpha. If I do the XRD of this alloy, you will and calculate this, find out the intensity of theta and this, and find out the percentage of theta. You will see that the percentage theta that I get here is higher than this 15%. You have to remember one more thing is, in all these percentages, we should find out what percentage we are talking. Whenever I say percentage in terms of phases, there are three types of percentages one can talk. What is called weight percent of the phase, volume percent of the phase. Whenever you are talking of atomic phase, we don't talk of atomic percent of the phase. You talk of atomic percent only for the composition of an alloy, composition of a phase. But when you are talking of two-phase mixture or a three-phase mixture, you either talk about volume percent or weight percent. There is also another percentage that we come across when you are talking of a microscope. If I take this alloy and look at the microscope, put it under an optical microscope and see, what I am actually seeing is an area percentage. Because it's a 2D image. Inside a 2D image, I see some black regions, some white regions. Let's say I'm doing perlite and ferrite, and I see how much of black region is there, how much of white region is there, and from that I say this much of perlite, this much of ferrite. And what is that percentage? It is the area percentage. We are going to come to optical microscopy at some stage and do what is called quantitative metrography, and there we will see that how do we correlate all this. So in principle, in an X-ray diffraction, what percentage I get? If I am getting this percentage, what is this? Is it a volume percentage or a weight percent? Actually what you get in a XRD is the volume, because it finds out the total volume of the phase. So and you look at what is the percentage that I am calculating from this phase diagram. From the phase diagram, if I am using a lever rule and finding out, what am I finding out is weight percent. I do not get volume percent there. And that's where the usual problem that we face. How do I correlate my microstructure to my lever rule? Lever rule gives me weight percent, microstructure gives me area percent, and area percent has to be converted to volume percent, and volume percent has to be converted to weight percent. How do I convert volume percent to weight percent? If I know the density of the phases, then I can always say weight percent of alpha is equal to volume percent of alpha, which I can find out from the microstructure, let us say, multiplied by the density, divided by volume percent of alpha multiplied by the density of alpha. This is density of alpha plus volume percentage of beta multiplied by the density of beta. If I do this, I can find out the weight percent, and that is what I should compare with my microstructure and with my what I see in the phase diagram. Phase diagram gives me, this is what phase diagram gives me. Phase diagram gives me only weight percent. XRD or microscopy give me usually volume percent only. Any microscopy, and in principle microscopy will not give you volume percent directly. It will only give you area percent, and doing image analysis and making some assumptions, we can convert area percent to volume percent. And from that volume percent, I have to convert it to weight percent, then compare, then only you can say this. Under certain special conditions, we can consider weight percent to be equivalent to volume percent without doing all these calculations. When do we do that? When the density of alpha is close to the density of beta. If both of them have similar density, then I don't need to do all this calculation. Because if you assume that this is equal to this, then you can simply take weight percent is equal to volume percent. You don't need to bother. Okay? So if it is equal to this, you can take out this, and that goes off. So there is no need of doing all this. So weight percent is equal to volume percent provided these two are equal. Only under that special condition, otherwise not. And it is very rare to find out two phases with the same densities. Very rarely you have two phases. Even if I take perlite in case, perlite has ferrite and cementite. Ferrite and cementite cannot have the same density. Ferrite is mostly pure iron, and cementite is having about 6.67% of carbon in it, and atomic percentage wise it has 25% of carbon in it. So it is not possible. So knowing this problem, I need to find out first find out the amount of theta from the XRD pattern, and make sure that the structure factor has to be considered. So in principle, because my structure factor of Al to Cu is higher than structure factor of alpha, the Al to Cu peak will be bigger because the intensity is square of the structure factor. So this peak, though it is supposed to be only 15%, it shows as if it is 30% or 40% maybe. So by simply calculating the ratio, you may get 30 or 40, but the actual amount is only 15%. That is because I have not considered, I have simply assumed that the area under the peak is nothing but the amount of the phase. Area under the peak is not simply amount of the phase. Unless I know what is the structure factor of the phase, two phases, and correct it into this. If I can do the corrections into this, and then whatever amount that I get will give me the actual value. So with this particular difficulty, I can actually also find out. What I will do is simply this. I find out the XRD pattern for each of these alloys. For example, alloy 5, alloy 6, alloy 7, all of them. For each of them, I find out the amount of the phase. And then what I do? I simply plot percentage of theta as a function of alloy composition. You see that the percentage of this theta will keep on increasing as I increase the copper content. From 5, 6, 7 up to this, it will be 0. Because 1, 2, 3, 4 does not have any theta phase at all. 5 only you will start seeing theta. 6 you will see theta. 7 you will see theta. But 5, 6, 7 if I compare, 7 will have a higher amount of theta, 6 will have higher, and 5 will have lower. So like this, I can see as I go to higher and higher, and I will see that the amount of theta phase will keep on increasing like this. And if I join this like a least square fit and find out where does this go to 0, that particular composition will be my solvus line. So I will be able to find out the solvus composition simply by finding out this. And because here I am not finding out the exact amounts, so I am not even bothered by the structure factor business here. Because structure factor, whether I am considering this alloy or this alloy or this alloy, for all of them the same structure factor. So I don't need to bother. Simply I take the ratios and plot this ratio. Consider the ratio to be giving some number, which I will call it as a fraction of the phase. Though I know that this fraction of the phase I am calculating from this ratio is not exactly the correct value, but it is the same for 5 and 6 and 7. The error whatever I am doing will be similar in all of the cases. So simply I plot that and find out where it is going to 0. So there are two methods of doing the solvus line calculation, and I do this for various temperatures. This is only for one temperature, because I have heated to this temperature, quenched all the alloys. And I will now not bother about alloys containing only one single phase. I will throw them away. I will only consider alloys which are showing the two-phase mixture. And only consider those alloys, and those alloys only I will consider. In the previous method, I said we throw away all the alloys showing the second phase. We only consider the alloys showing single phase and calculate the lattice parameter and plot the lattice parameter. So these are the two techniques. One where from the phase fraction you can find out second phase fraction. Second is a technique where we use the lattice parameter of the primary phase, which is the matrix phase. So any one of these techniques can give you this value and basically extrapolating to where this goes to 0. And this can be done at various temperatures, and for each temperature you can find. In all the cases, my experimental technique is the same. Take a number of alloys, heat it to that temperature, hold them there for some time, quench them, all of them. And take all these alloys and then do XRD. So once I have XRD, find out which are the alloys which are showing me single phase XRD pattern, which are the alloys which are showing me two phase XRD pattern. And if I am using my first method, parametric method, I use only those alloys which are single phase. And if I am using the second method, which is phase fraction method, I use those alloys which are showing me two phase mixture. and then in the second case I take the find out the amount of the phase. In the first case I find out the lattice parameter. So this is how one can do the phase diagram calculations, and people regularly do this. And as I told you, the limitation is that you cannot use it for anything other than solver's lines. Solver's lines are the ones which you can accurately measure using this. Now let's look at what are the other things that X-ray diffraction can do. What are the things we said so far? We said so far that one is the orientation of single crystals. Second is the structure determination. Third is the lattice parameter. Including precision lattice parameter, how to calculate it precisely. Fourth, we said phase diagram. In the phase diagram, we said about finding out the second phase presence, and then from that finding out the phase diagram, or looking at the lattice parameter of the first phase and finding out. Now we come to the fifth thing, which is, for example, if I have a material which is a polycrystalline material, can I find out the grain size inside? So let's look at that aspect, which is called grain size. And in this connection, what people have found out that if I use the normal XRD diffraction, where I am using an XRD beam, incident beam, and a diffracted beam, and I am using a simple constructive interference condition, and from that I arrive at a condition called n lambda equal to 2d sin theta. This has been arrived at assuming that there are infinite number of planes below that. And that means my grain size is infinite. If my grain size is not infinite, if the grain size is finite, that means the number of planes inside grain. Please remember one thing, that whenever I am talking of a material with different grains, the orientation here is different, and the orientation here is different, and the orientation here is different. So when an X-ray is falling and then getting diffracted, what I am looking at is each grain, what plane is at a particular Bragg angle for the X-ray. So as a result, the diffracting planes from grain 1 will be different from diffracting planes from grain 2, and different from diffracting planes from grain 3. The plane which is parallel to this surface, the plane which is parallel to the surface in grain 1 will be different from the grain 2. Right? Obviously. Otherwise, you can't call it as grain 1 and grain 2. If they both have the same grain, we don't call it as grain 1 and grain 2. The fact that there is a boundary means that there is an orientation difference. So this plane which is parallel to the surface for grain 1 has some other indices, maybe 111, and this plane which is parallel to the surface in grain 2 maybe 110 or 100 or something else, 123. So as a result, we get diffraction, and if this grain size is limited, then the number of planes which are parallel to the surface within this are limited. If that is the case, then in principle we said, if I do an XRD pattern, I should get a peak like this, which is called a delta function in principle. Just it should be a line. But what we usually see is, when you have limited number of planes, in principle, if my theta is either slightly larger than Bragg angle or lower than the Bragg angle, all the diffracted beams that are coming out will not have constructive interference, and as a result of the destructive interference, the intensity should be 0 on both sides. Because in principle, if I have an infinite planes of the sample, you will see that there is always a destructive interference for the angles which are higher or lower, and as a result you get a delta function. But if you have limited number of planes, then you do not have a large number of planes that are available for the complete destructive interference to happen. If the theta is slightly deviating from the Bragg angle, so for example, if the theta is slightly either higher or lower, these beams that are coming and falling on the sample do not get completely destructively interfered. So as a result, you will have some intensity left out, and that causes the sample to have a peak like this. And so that means at an angle which is slightly deviating from the Bragg angle, there is some intensity, and at some other angle which is slightly deviating, there is some other intensity which is actually supposed to be 0, but it is non-zero. And this is going to be more and more worse as you decrease the grain size, as you decrease the number of planes inside the sample. As you are decreasing the grain size means number of planes, because the D is fixed. For a given plane, the D is fixed. So if I am decreasing the grain size, D are not changing. D for a particular HKL is always D equal to A by square root H square plus K square plus L square. Once I know lattice parameter for a given material, once I know the HKL which is parallel to the surface, then its D is fixed. So if I am simply reducing the grain size, going from some 100 microns to about 100 nanometers to about 10 nanometers, what I am doing is simply reducing the number of planes within that grain. And if I am reducing the number of planes, the number of planes which are undergoing destructive interference will slowly start coming down. So as a result, you will see that the peaks become broader and broader. In fact, people have now seen that when you go to very small sizes like 1 to 2 nanometers, it is very difficult to differentiate between a crystalline diffraction pattern and an amorphous diffraction pattern. In fact, many a times people have seen when the crystal structure goes, the grain size goes below a certain level, the crystal suddenly becomes amorphous. We ourselves have seen in so many systems during our own research that when you take something to below 10 nanometers, generally this happens. The crystal suddenly breaks down and becomes amorphous. So these things can happen, and as a result, you can get a peak broadening. So in principle, I can use this peak broadening to find out the lattice parameter. That is what is a person by name Scherrer. Earlier we have called it as Debye-Scherrer camera. The same Scherrer has given a formula where he said the D, here I will use some other D rather than the small d, which is the interplanar distance. This let us call it as grain diameter, okay, which is nothing but this diameter, let us say, assuming this to be a spherical. If I assume this to be spherical, in principle that will be the diameter, and that is given by a formula 0.9 lambda by beta cos theta. What is beta? Beta is nothing but the full width at half maximum, the peak broadening, extent of peak broadening. And this in principle, Scherrer does not define even it as a grain size. He simply calls it as coherent scattering length. That means it is nothing but the thickness of the sample grain in the direction perpendicular to the top plane, whatever plane that is giving diffraction. If I am using this particular HKL plane for giving the diffraction and using the peak broadening of that HKL plane, whichever plane it is, it may be 111 plane, what is the thickness of the sample in the direction perpendicular to that plane is what is this, which is called coherent scattering length. And some people usually call it as crystallite size. I need to give you these terms basically because this is different from what is called particle size. Because many people get confused, particular people working in powder metallurgy kind of areas, they simply call this as particle size. It is not particle size. A particle can be polycrystalline, may have number of grains inside them. So what you are actually measuring is what is crystallite size, which can be considered to be a grain size. But sometimes even in a grain, inside the grain, there may be what is called subgrains. What actually you are seeing is that subgrain size. Provided your grain does not have any subgrains, what it gives you is actually the grain size. So if you have a powder particle, if this powder particle is polycrystalline, you will not get the particle size here. You will only get what are the grains inside, and that average grain size is what you get. And you are only getting an average, bulk average technique. There may be a range of grain sizes. You will not be getting range of grain. For finding out the range of grain sizes in a nanomaterial, you should go to a microscope. Maybe a Fagesium, maybe a TEM. but you cannot use an XRD to find out the average, what is called the range of grain sizes. Or if your particles are single crystal particles, there are some techniques by which people make single crystal nanoparticles. For example, if you use sol gel kind of techniques, one single nanoparticle is one single grain. There are no grain boundaries inside the particle. Such particles, if you want to take, if you take and measure the XRD, what you are actually getting the grain size is also a particle size. So grain size and particle size are same in such cases where your grains is equal to one particle. One particle is equal to one grain. You can also get particle sizes by other methods. For example, you can do a laser scattering, what is called, people usually call it as particle size analyzers. Okay, so you can take particles, suspend them into a liquid, allow a X-ray, a laser beam to fall, and by the way it scatters, gets scattered by the particles, you will be able to find out the particle size. So those are all particle sizes. Even SEM will give you particle size. SEM will not give you a grain size. But in TEM, you can see a grain size. Even inside a particle, if there are number of grains, by doing diffraction, which we are going to see it a little later, you can find out which are the grains, what is the actual grain size inside a particle. You can find out from that. Go into what is called a dark field imaging. You will be able to see what is the actual. So whenever somebody is working on nanomaterials, all these questions come into picture. What is the particle size? What is the grain size? So XRD gives you actually a crystallite size, which may be even a subgrain size. But if there are no subgrains in your material, what it is giving you is a grain size, which is actually a coherent scattering line. But this is also not so easy. The reason is peak broadening that you are seeing is not only due to grain size, the smaller grain size. And also I should tell you that peak broadening that you get is almost zero. The contribution coming from the grain size goes to zero beyond 100 nanometers. So you should not use X-ray diffraction technique to find out any grain size beyond 100 nanometers. If your alloy has 1 micron grain size, X-ray diffraction is not the technique to find out the grain size. Only for nanomaterials this has to be used. And people have found that this broadening that you are seeing is not only due to the grain size. What are the other things that contribute to this? If you look at that, you will see that first and foremost, that here I am assuming that there is a monochromatic beam of X-ray falling on the sample and then getting diffracted and giving you a certain angle of diffraction theta corresponding to a particular particular HKL plane. Now, instead of a particular monochromatic beam, if I am getting beams with a range of lambda, for a given lambda, there is a given theta for a given HKL plane. But if the lambda is not monochromatic, but it has some plus or minus delta lambda associated with it, that means I do not have a monochromatic radiation, but I have some small range. That small range for a same despacing will cause a small range in the theta. So there will be a theta plus delta theta associated with this. If there is a delta lambda, there has to be a delta theta because my D is fixed, because my crystal is fixed. I have a fixed crystal onto which I am sending the X-ray, and in which there are certain atomic planes, and those atomic planes are giving the diffraction. So the D corresponding to those atomic planes are fixed. So if I have a range of lambda, I will get a range of theta, and as a result, my peak will not be like this, but my peak will be like this. This is caused by a delta lambda. And this is what we call it as instrumental broadening. There are many other factors also that can give you instrumental broadening. This is only one of the factors. I will not go into the details of all the instrumental factors. If, for example, if your alignment of your X-ray tube is not proper, that can also give you broadening. So there are so many other factors which can give you broadening. Some temperature also can give you broadening. Okay. So if you are not doing at room temperature, if you are doing, for example, high temperature, so there can be possibility of some broadening coming. So there are so many factors, but these are all called instrumental broadening basically because it is not your sample which is giving this. It is something else which is giving. The second thing that can give you, first thing is instrumental broadening. The second contribution is grain size, which we just now saw, fine grain size. The third thing is what is called non-uniform strain. If your sample has some strain in it, let's say there are atomic planes which are bent like this, then what you see is there is a compression on this side, there is a tension on this side. Right? If there is a compression here, tension here. That means certain atomic planes are tensed. That means their lattice parameter is higher, and certain are compressed, their lattice parameter is lower. So that means as a result what happens is because of the increase in the lattice parameter in some case and decrease in the lattice parameter in some case, what you see is the peak starts getting broadened. Because now if the A is lower, okay, then for the A being lower, D will be lower for a given lambda. Now I am considering fixed lambda. If the D is lower, the theta will be higher. So wherever there is a compression, where the lattice parameter is smaller, the D is smaller, the theta is larger. Wherever there is an expansion, the A is larger, that means D is larger, then the theta is smaller. So you will see that there will be peaks which will come at a lower angle, at a higher angle, just because of some distortion. Instead of this distortion, if all the sample goes for an expansion or compression, if there is a uniform compression or a uniform expansion, that means I apply a tensile load on a single crystal and there is an expansion in the material, and then what you see, if there is a expansion, if A has increased in all the planes, then you see that the D has increased and the theta decreases. So that means this peak, instead of coming like this, it will come like this. The peak simply shifts to a lower angle. If there is a compression where the lattice parameter has decreased, then the D decreases, then the theta increases. So you will see a peak like this. So whenever there is a uniform expansion or uniform compression inside a material, you will see either lattice parameters will either expand or decrease, contract, and as a result peaks will shift. But if there is a non-uniform strain inside the material, so that means certain planes are expanding and certain planes are contracting, okay, then there is both expansion and contraction. That causes a broadening rather than this shifting of the peak. You simply see a broadening. And this broadening, for example, if you take a simple copper, let us say, and keep on rolling it, okay, if you take a copper and then take peaks like this, I'm sorry, I should first put the first peak to be bigger. This is the 111 peak, this is 200 peak of copper, let us say, and now I have rolled it by some 50%, and you see that if I look at the XRD pattern, the XRD pattern will become like this now. If I further roll it by 80%, the XRD pattern will further become like this. So this peak, the peak position will not change. Peak will simply start becoming broader and broader. And this peak position also will not change. Peak will simply become broader and broader. So you can see that all these three will contribute. So if you have a sample, unknown sample, for which you have done XRD pattern, and if you are seeing some broadening like this, this broadening might have come from instrumental broadening, might have come from fine grain size, might have also come from non-uniform strain. Now how do I cater to all these three? To do that, what first job that we do is, we take a standard sample where we know the grain size is very large and that there is no strain inside the material. That means highly annealed material. Let's say I am working on aluminum, nano aluminum. I take aluminum, anneal it at high temperature, take a powder of annealed aluminum, which is annealed at high temperature, where I know the grain size is very large and there is no strain inside the material. And such a material, if I subject it to X-ray diffraction, I get again some peak broadening. And that broadening definitely I know is coming because of instrumental broadening. Because there is no fine grain size inside the material, there is no strain inside the material, but still I am getting some broadening. And that broadening is only because of that. This particular broadening, I deduct it from my actual sample, which is a nano material, let us say. So once I deduct it, I get some other broadening which is left out. And this broadening people said it is because of now two factors. These are the two factors. How do I take care of that? For that, there are so many people who have worked on it. For example, Friedel is one person who has worked on it, where people said this broadening that I am getting can be composed of two parameters. One is coming from grain size, another is coming from strain. So what people said is, if I multiply with this with cos theta, you can see b cos theta is equal to 0.9 lambda by d, 0.9 lambda by d plus epsilon sin theta, where epsilon is the strain inside the material and d is the grain size. Now what I do simply is I plot. If I have a pattern, XRD pattern with so many peaks inside, for each peak I deduct the instrumental broadening, I find out the remaining broadening, and that broadening I have found out for each of the peak, and for each of the peak there is a theta, and I now plot what is called beta cos theta or b cos theta versus sin theta. Once I do b cos theta versus sin theta, I get a plot like this or like this, whatever it is, depending on the situation. Okay. And once I get a plot like this, I get, for example, if there are 4 peaks, I get 4 points. For each peak, there is a b broadening for each peak, and for each peak, there is a theta. So for each peak, I find out beta cos theta, I find out the sin theta, and plot all of them. And now do a least square fitting of that. And the slope that I get here is nothing but the epsilon, and the intercept that I get here is nothing but this. So from the intercept, I can find out what is the d, knowing the lambda, and from the slope, I can find out the strain. So I am able to get both these parameters at a time simply by taking this. And many people usually refer to this as Williamson-Hall method. Of course, Williamson-Hall has some other modifications. I will not go into the details of it, but in general, one can represent this, which is called a multi-peak method, by going to a number of peaks. Because for this, you need to know, if I want to plot anything, I need to have minimum 3 points to do any plotting. So that means I should have minimum 3 peaks in my XRD pattern to be able to do this. But there can be some nanomaterials where I get only 1 peak and I do not get the rest of the peaks. If you have ever done made nanomaterials by ball milling technique, you would usually see this problem. I take an aluminum powder, start doing ball milling, high energy ball milling, let's say, which is one of the top down methods by for making nanomaterials. You see that initially I will have all the peaks of aluminum, but as I continue ball milling for 5 hours, 10 hours or 20 hours or so, you see that all the high angle peaks will vanish because they become so broad and their intensity comes down. And though their integrated intensity is reasonably high, but their height is so small that it merges into the background. So you will actually see after some time of milling that only the first peak will remain. None of the other peaks can be actually recognized. Then only I have 1 peak. From 1 peak, how do I do this calculation? It is very difficult. This is why there is another technique called, people call it as pseudo-wired technique, which is called single peak approximation. What they do is, they now take this peak, fit this peak as a Gaussian and Lorentzian, Gaussian and Cauchy to be exact. These are all various ways of fitting the peaks using various approximations. So if you fit this peak as a Gaussian or a Cauchy type of fitting, you will see that the Gaussian will give you the strain and the Cauchy will give you the crystallite size. That means peak broadening coming from the Gaussian fit will give you the strain part of it. Peak broadening coming from the Cauchy will give you crystallite size. These are all a little detailed ways of doing it, but maybe unless you actually go to a research level, it may not be necessary. And for the time being, this is sufficient for us to understand. Okay. So if you have a number of peaks, I want to find out both the crystallite size and strain, I can use this method clearly. So this is how we can actually find out the both these. So you can see that if my material has both strain and grain size, I can find out. And how do I find out if there is some residual stress inside my material? That is another question. So far we said about grain size measurement, and I also talked about strain, which we call it as a lattice strain, which is a non-uniform strain. Please remember, we are not measuring the uniform strain. I said uniform strain will cause peak shifts. Non-uniform strain will cause broadening. Only from broadening we are finding out this. You can see grain size or lattice non-uniform strain can be found out from broadening. All other things so far that we talked about are only from peak positions. We never used broadening anywhere here. Broadening we used only here. Okay. Now we talk about how to find out stresses inside the material. Particularly, let us say residual stresses. Can I find out residual stresses? Because we know many a times when a material is allowed to for some expansion under tension and release the stresses, there will be some stresses which are residual, which are remaining. Can we find out? Again, people say in principle it should be possible. What you have to simply do is first take a material which is an annealed material, let us say, which does not have any stresses in it. Find out the D corresponding to a particular plane, and here what you do is you take the material, put your goniometer in such a way that for a given lambda the angle chosen is very large angle. That means I choose something like a 220 kind of peak. Why do I choose? Because the lattice parameter calculations are more precise if I do a high angle. As you have seen in precision lattice parameter, if I choose a higher and higher angle peak, I will always get more precise lattice parameter. So what I do is we will stop here and continue it in the next class because the time is over. Let's hold on for a while.